Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. It's nice to see a full room. My name is Kim Henkelman, and I am the program person for the year. So we had sent a survey out and asked you to give us some feedback and some thoughts about what you'd like to have happen on these Wednesdays. Most of you did not, so you're stuck with what I want to do. I have engaged the help of Myra Grant to help me, so we're putting together what we hope is kind of a robust and fun-filled year, full of good information. We want to do some provoking things to make us think a little bit. I'll give you, in March, we're going to have the topic's going to be ethics, because we like to do that every year and need to do that every year. But it's going to start with a quiz at your tables. It will be graded, so study up. And then following that, we're going to have the Stump the Experts panel for ethics. So start thinking a little bit for next month about some ethical questions or dilemmas or situations that might come up. And we're going to try to stump our experts. In April, we have a speaker coming in to talk about the effective use of volunteers, because we all have volunteers that we work with day in and day out. Quite frankly, none of our nonprofits would survive if we didn't have great volunteers. So I think we'll enjoy that topic. In May, we're having a presentation on capital campaigns, but from a different perspective. We have a panel of volunteers who worked on a capital campaign to talk about what it's like from their seat when we ask them to go raise millions of dollars and what it feels like and what's helpful. And I think that will be some good, very practical information for us. The other thing I'm going to do is pass out cards. I'm going to introduce our speaker in a moment, and while, I don't know about you, but when I'm listening to a speaker, I always think of things I want to ask and don't want to interrupt, and he'll probably tell you not to interrupt. So jot them down, so at the end when he says, are there any questions, you say, oh yeah, I remember that comment, or I want to know more about that. So let's pass these around, so while we're doing this, you have a chance to. Plus, I think people pay attention to it. They have an assignment. So, today's presentation is on planned giving, and it's not planned giving 101, because you all already have taken that class. This is planned giving 102. And our speaker is Ryan Harman, who has been in the business for I don't know, 20 years probably. Ryan is an Edward Jones investment. He's with the Edward Jones Investment Company. He's a financial advisor. He also has been very, very involved, and probably almost more important to him, and I'll let him speak to that, is his work with nonprofits. He's done a lot of work in the Henderson County area, in Buncombe County, and now all over the world, and I'm sure he'll be talking about that a little bit. I know Ryan because when I took my job at Part E, Ryan was on the board, and you know, new staff person, and you're kind of getting a sense of who your board members are. And I didn't have a good, I couldn't quite get a read on Ryan. Yes.
And you did not call me.
It took us a while. And then Ryan became the board chair, and I think that was a great gift for the two of us to really work together and have a sense of what we were doing together. So a great partnership with a volunteer board chair and our staff. And it's a pleasure to introduce Ryan and turn this room over to him. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here, and it's great to see all the wonderful work that you all are doing. This particular lecture has stemmed out of my work with an organization called Project Healing Waters Fly Fishing. We use fly fishing and fly tying as rehabilitation for disabled veterans. We're 12 years old. We started, Asheville was actually our third or fourth program. We started 12 years ago. We now have 230 programs in 4 countries. So the concept has boomed. We realized a couple years ago that a lot of these veteran service organizations were struggling to get good information and develop consistent practices in their fundraising in support of the veterans. So a bunch of us got together with the support of CACI, a big defense contractor, and have developed some educational programs stemming from board development, fundraising, planned giving, and this is part of that. We'll see how this goes. This is actually a 2-hour course that I've condensed down to about half an hour. So it would be good if you would hold your questions till the end. If I do this right, that means we'll run out of time, and I'll get out of here without having to answer any really tough questions. Oh, and I did change the number from 102 to 201. That sounded much better. So what is planned giving? Everyone in here probably has a definition on their books about what they consider planned giving to be. And if you punch in what is planned giving on Google, you get some 83,000 different definitions of what it is. Planned giving, part of a donor's overall financial or estate planning. That's from plannedgiving.com. Target analytics, gifts that require more thought and planning. Well, I don't know about you, but all my gifts require some thought, so I never really liked that definition. Planned giving, contribution that is arranged in the present and allocated at a future date. Well, I really didn't like any of these, primarily because they were too confusing, they were too long, or they didn't really get to the heart of what planned giving planning is. So my definition is any action either through formal or informal agreement by a donor to indicate their intention to make a present or future gift. So I think that covers it. It also brings some things into planned giving that we don't traditionally think about as planned giving concepts. I love quotes. I think when you read a quote, you see someone's insight into the world around them, the things that are important to them. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes. I think this is probably the most prolific philosopher of our modern era. So for those of you who can't read it, it says, planning is what you do before you do something so that when you do it, it's not all mixed up. And that great philosopher, Winnie the Pooh. We're going to kind of fly through this. I think, let me ask you a question here. How many people in here have been professional fundraisers or in the fundraising industry for 3 years or less? Okay. 10 years or less. Okay. 10 years or more. Okay, wonderful. So we have a pretty good mix here. So we won't get into too much of the basics. Really where I think you're going to find value in this is we're going to talk about some specific concepts and how the financial planning arena looks at those concepts and then how you look at those concepts. So for the most part, we know that during our lifetime, intro vivos gifts include things like pledges. There's one of those you may not think about as planned giving. Pledges absolutely are part of the planned giving concept. Gift annuities, charitable benefit trusts, charitable remainder trusts, cruts, crits, crickets, all that stuff. Donor advised investment accounts. Ooh, we'll talk about those in a little bit and how those are competing with the people in the room. And then we'll also touch on some of the post-mortem gifts done through bequests, trusts and wills. Beneficiary designations, we're going to focus on that a little bit. That's important to understand. And also third-party asset administration and foundations. So let's talk just a second about pledges, because this is something that is getting a lot of attention here. And when I say pledges, a lot of people right away they think, well, that's not really part of planned giving. Well, if we go back to my original definition, if planned giving is somebody that has to think through and provide information or intent that they're going to give you a gift, a pledge is absolutely part of the planned giving process. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we integrate that into the overall planned giving culture so that we can develop a simple pledge into what potentially can be a larger or a significant planned gift further down the line. Certainly pledges can be cash or non-cash. Pledges, more and more we're seeing the legal environment change around pledges. Pledges can be enforceable if they meet the general contract law principles. Acceptance, consideration, naming of a building, in some cases planting of a tree. So the environment is changing dramatically, and right now as we speak, some of you may have remember 2012, Garth Brooks sued Canadian Regional Hospital. He made a $500,000 gift The gift was so that his deceased mother's name would be on the wing of a new women's center. They didn't honor that. He sued them. He won. Not only did he win $500,000, he won $1 million for that. So the one that's in the news right now is St. John's Hospital Foundation sued Paula Kent Meehan. Miss Meehan, for the ladies in the room, founder of Redken Hairline Products. She'd been a substantial donor. She'd given over $20 million to the foundation over the last 10 years. She left a $5 million pledge. Not long after that, a dispute developed between the board and the executive director. She passed away. They did not honor the pledge. St. John sued. This is still in the court system. This will set precedent on whether or not a foundation has a claim, has standing to sue for a pledge. So this will be interesting to see how this plays out. So let's move over and talk a little bit about gift annuities. The basic structure of a gift annuity is a donor comes to you, a donor wants income, they want you to benefit from a gift, they provide a gift to you, and in exchange, you, either through self-funding or through connections with a commercial annuity provider, provide them a stream of income. A couple things to remember. Gift annuities are completed gifts. They cannot be canceled by the donor once they occur, and that becomes important as we, here at the end, we'll talk a little bit about ethics. Highly appreciated assets are a great place to look at that for the mitigation properties of being able to reduce capital gains taxes on gifts made. So you can use stock, real estate, fund a gift annuity, not only not have to pay the capital gains tax, you can generate income in return. So that's a very, very powerful planning tool as you move forward. At-risk obligations. How many organizations in here actually fund their own annuities? Still one on the books, or just one?
And you took that, so. This is becoming, again, we'll talk a little bit about, there's been some changing regulation about fiduciary responsibility for the investment of institutional funds, MIFA, I think is the acronym for it. Gift annuities can be at risk. You can fund them yourself, but that puts you at risk if the individual lives. I'm part of an organization that has a young woman on the books now that is now 102 years old, and she has a gift annuity that they have been funding for 37 years. So she put $50,000 in, it's paid out $104,000.
Call the surprise.
Yep. And here's where I think this presentation is going to apply most to those in this room, is giving you an opportunity to see some insight into what you're dealing with as you go out into the market and prospect these type of products. Gift annuity rates typically are lower than immediate retail annuity rates that have a life-only designation. And that's really important, and I'm going to come back to that. The reason the rates are lower are, number one, when you look at gift annuity structure, it uses a hybrid mortality table. So it uses a male-female hybrid mortality table. Well, for the most part, women live longer than men, so the life expectancy table is longer on a hybrid table than it is an individual table. So that means that the payouts are longer, the rates of return have to be a little bit lower. There's also some more flexibility in the commercial market for the underlying assumptions. Most states that regulate gift annuities in this country require the gift annuity assumptions for rates of return 4.25% with 1% expenses. So 3.25% is the assumed internal rate of return on a gift annuity contract. Not all commercial annuities are subject to that, so they do have the ability to structure contracts a little bit more flexible than the gift annuities do. Now, let's jump back up and talk about life-only designation, because this is really important as you talk to your potential donors about that. Life-only simply means if an individual comes into my office and they buy a gift annuity, life-only means that when they die, who gets that money? Insurance company, right? Gift annuity, when they die, that money goes to you. Regular retail annuity, they die, that money goes to the insurance company. Nobody in the industry sells life-only annuities anymore. The fiduciary responsibility is so high on that, there is no real justification to sell those commercially in the retail market. So what we do is we sell a contract that has some sort of guaranteed return of principal, either a cash refund or an installment refund, so that when that client dies, client comes into my office, gives me $100,000, I put them in an immediate annuity, they get a stream of income for 2 years, and they die. Someone is going to get the rest of that $100,000. So it just doesn't go to the insurance company. When you run a standard annuity contract that is not a life-only designation, gift annuities will almost always be better. Almost always. That changes the way the mortality tables work, and it changes the assumed rate of return required to fund the annuity contract. So for an individual that says, look, you know what, I want this money to go to you when I'm gone, and you're receiving some competition from a financial advisor saying, well, you can do a commercial annuity, you can do a retail annuity, pay me commissions, and you'll get better income off of it. That's probably not true. And if it is, there's some real question about how the contract was structured. So that's a big advantage for your part. More and more, we're seeing gift annuities as a great spendthrift option for the wealth transfer to adult children. I won't ask the question, but are we all seeing more and more 40-year-old children living at home than ever before? So one of the big things we see in our office is individuals that are coming in saying, you know what, my kids can't manage money for anything at all. So I'm not interested in leaving them large amounts of money. I'm interested in giving them an income stream. Wow, what a great opportunity for somebody that also has charitable inclinations. You can provide that child an income stream. When the individual is gone, when the child is gone, those dollars can revert back to the charity of choice. So this is a great opportunity to address some of those income issues that your donors have. Gift annuities can be funded with publicly traded securities and real estate, except in New York. You can't fund gift annuities in New York with real estate, and that's because New York realized that people were avoiding capital gains tax payments on real estate, so they did away with it. And it can mitigate capital gains tax liability for the donors, as I've already said. Real estate's a really good option. You don't run into those opportunities that often, but you run into somebody that owns property, owns an apartment building, owns something like that. They reach a point in their life where they don't want to do that anymore. They still want that income, rental property especially. They still want that income. They want that $2,000 or $3,000 a month coming in, but they don't want the overhead of having to manage that property. You can potentially equate that income through the gift of real estate to a gift annuity. You guys benefit from that, and they benefit from it as well. We're going to touch briefly on charitable remainder trusts and charitable lead trusts. Charitable remainder trusts are simply trusts that provide annual income to the grantor. The person that establishes the trust, they get income, and then at their death or their children's death, actually you can go, what is it now? You can go 3 generations on one of these. So you can go like 68 years or something like that before you actually have to terminate these trusts. So they're not always the greatest thing in the world. Charitable lead trust is the flip of that. So in that case, the charity receives a stream of income, and then the assets go back to the donor at some point in the future. These were really popular as a financing tool. Nonprofit organizations that were doing building projects or something, or carrying debt back in the days when that was a little bit more popular, could establish cash flow components with charitable lead trusts, and then those assets would come back to the donor at some point in time. So it was a cash flow management tool. They're complex. They require an estate attorney to establish. They are also excluded from federal and state tax limits. So if you establish one of these trusts, the dollars in that trust are not included in your gross estate upon your death. That's obviously changed, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And they can be structured. They can be structured as really good investment tools for both the donor and the charity, because they can be created so that the withdrawals, I use charitable remainder trust as an example. So an individual says, well, okay, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for growth in the account, but I'm also looking for rising income. I want more income 10 years down the road than I have today. So the IRS states that rates can be, there's a formula they use, but rates can be as high as 6.5% on the distribution of those trusts. The donor takes a lower rate, takes a 4% distribution, and the value of the account grows. So not only are they helping themselves with rising income, they're also helping their charities in the hope that when they're gone, those accounts will grow. And that has been the case over the last couple decades. I've got clients that funded a $250,000 trust annuity. They're pulling 4.5% off that account. The account's grown to $660 some odd thousand over the last 15, 16 years. So the charity's really happy about that. When we look at charitable benefit trust prospecting, these trusts have declined considerably with the change in the unified tax limits. So back when I started, and a lot of you that raised your hand started, anything over $650,000 would be a taxable estate upon your death. That number is now $5.25 million. So basically a couple could have $10.5 million in an estate if they structure it correctly and not be subject to estate taxes. So this type of planning is not used the way that it used to be used. They're almost always established from the advice of a planning professional. I've never had anybody walk in and say, oh, I want to do a charitable remainder trust. So keep that in mind if you're out there talking to the professionals, the attorneys, the accountants, the financial advisors. They are the ones that are really driving that type of vehicle. And probably one of the most important things is the reason these came into popularity is they're donor driven. So the donor retains control of not only the investment decisions, the beneficiaries. So these trusts have been in place for a long time, and suddenly a beneficiary goes out of favor. Wounded Warrior, there's a great example. I field that call all the time. What's going on with Wounded Warrior? So when you're out prospecting those, if you discover those or find those, you know, remember, there's an opportunity for that donor to change the beneficiary designations in those contracts. And what you'll find is very few organizations that I've worked with have done a really good job of mining information on who has these type of contracts. They're out there. There's, you know, I know of $20 million worth of them in Hendersonville. And less than half of the organizations that are named in those contracts know that they're even named in those contracts. So they're out there. Just briefly, we're going to touch about donor advised investment accounts. We're going to talk more about this. I've got some special comments on these. This is just something that really was created by the financial services industry to hold on to assets. So instead of giving those assets to the community foundation or to your organization to manage, Edward Jones, Charles Schwab, Merrill Lynch will continue to manage those assets, continue to get paid for those assets. Donors can deposit money into them on an ongoing basis, and then they can name beneficiaries, multiple beneficiaries that receive payments on an annual basis. There are limits. There is a certain amount that has to go out every year, but they're actually pretty low. I mean, it can be as low as 5% of the value of the account. So, yeah, there's something you're going to run into more, and I'll comment a little bit more on those here in a few minutes. I wanted to take a second. This was not part of this normal presentation, but I took an opportunity to look at my office, and every year I'm curious to see where the largest number of charitable donations comes from. Over the past couple years, we've had qualified charitable distributions from IRA accounts. And basically what that does is that allows an individual to donate up to $100,000 from their IRA accounts, traditional or Roth account, on a non-taxable basis. Last year, this was 62% of all the gifts that came out of my office. I had $1.3 million that were done through QDC distributions. So this is growing in interest, and it's actually a really good opportunity to educate your donors about an opportunity they may have, they may not be taking advantage of. This is a great prospecting tool. It opens the door really to the planning conversation without, if you call somebody up and say, hey, let me tell you about a charitable remainder trust or a CRUT. So, hey, would you mind if we had a conversation about how to reduce your taxes on your IRA distributions? Heck yeah. So this is a great door opener. What you're basically the donor profile, it's applicable to individuals over the age of 70 and a half that are receiving required minimum distributions. The IRS says that once you reach 70 and a half, you have to take a certain amount of money out of your IRA account. The justification is the IRS wants you to pay taxes before you're dead. That's exactly what the rule is for. So, these are front line, so you do not include these on the front page of your 1040. So they are not subject to itemization. So you're not doing it as an itemized donation, which you might be doing as a typical donation to a charity. They are also not subject to limits or phase-outs. So now you have phase-outs that start. Do I have any accountants in the room? Phase-outs start at $156,000, I think, in annual income, somewhere in that neighborhood. So anybody with an income over $156,000 cannot deduct all of their deductions, even their charitable deductions. You also now have a surtax at $250,000, where there's an additional 3.5% income tax on those dollars. So a business owner or someone that's going to realize over $250,000, they potentially could reduce their frontline income by a considerable amount by using this type of gift. Yeah, they're looking to reduce front page taxable income. We're not going to talk a whole lot about bequests. We're going to focus on some of these other areas. One thing to remember as a fundraising professional is there is a difference in the way someone leaves a bequest, whether it's a specific amount, a percentage, or a remainder to their estate. And certainly some of those can have different benefits depending on how the estate is. Is it real estate? Is it liquid assets? So when you're having those conversations, if that question comes up, well, how should I do it? Should I give you a specific amount? Should we do it as a percentage? Should I do it as a remainder of my estate? Understand that those are different, and they will result in different degrees of benefit for you upon the donor's death. This is an area that is becoming increasingly important, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but beneficiary designations. Beneficiary designation is just a legal designation on an annuity contract, a life insurance policy, an IRA account. These are legally binding designations, and they are not subject to probate. So they supersede will and trust designations, and that's something that your donors will run into problems with all the time. One of the biggest things we do on a daily basis is we make sure that documents agree with one another. So someone will have they think all their assets are going into a trust. Lo and behold, we get their IRA accounts, and their IRA accounts are going to the ex-wife that they've never changed. So I can tell you, I told another group recently about a horrible story with that, where a gentleman passed away and left a multi-million-dollar IRA account to his ex-wife that he had been divorced from for almost a decade. A court battle ensued between the current wife and the ex-wife. These type of designations are either integrated, meaning that they are part of the vehicle, they are part of the IRA. For anybody that's done an IRA account or a 401k account, you have to name a beneficiary. You get a beneficiary page that you have to name. That is an integrated beneficiary designation. They can also be added on, and this is where a lot of people miss an opportunity. TOD, transfer on death, POD, pay on death, bank accounts, brokerage accounts. They are legal in the state of North Carolina. They're not legal in all states, but this gives an individual to effectively create a non-probatable estate without ever doing a will, a trust, or ever seeing an attorney. So these designations will hold up, and they are out there. They can be changed easily and at any time. So unlike a trust account, if I want to change my beneficiary, I call up my banker, I call up my financial advisor, he sends me a form, I change it, we're done. That's it. Prospecting beneficiary designations is something that I think needs to happen more and more, primarily because of the increasing complexity and cost of traditional estate planning has made this much more interesting, much more applicable to a vast number of your donors. Now, that individual out there that's worth $4, $5, $6, $7 million, they're still going to need to sit down and get into some complex estate planning conversations. But that's not the vast majority of our donors. The vast majority of our donors are individuals that probably have net worth between $300,000 and $700,000. That they have relatively simple financial situations. They own a home, they own a land, they own a place in Florida, they have a big IRA account, big investment account, and they're living off their investment income and their Social Security. Those individuals more and more are taking an interest in, hey, how can we plan our estates without dropping $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 going through the traditional estate planning route, with the attorneys. Do I have any attorneys in the room? They don't like when I say that. Individuals are often very unclear about who their beneficiaries can be. They don't know that a charity can be listed as a beneficiary. They don't understand that. So they think, oh, if I'm married, my spouse has to be my beneficiary, or my kids have to be my beneficiary, because frankly, this just doesn't get the attention that it should. So this is a growing opportunity for the nonprofit world to take advantage of educating their donors about beneficiary designations and capitalize on a lot of that. Don't neglect contingent designations. So you have a primary beneficiary. So if I die, I'm going to give Kim all my money. She's my primary beneficiary. So now maybe what I do is I name Pardee as my contingent beneficiary. There's something that's becoming very useful in estate planning now called disclaimer planning. So Kim could say, you know what, Ryan, I don't need your money, so I'm going to disclaim it and I'm going to let it go to Pardee. So even if you're not listed as the primary beneficiary on a contract, contingent beneficiaries are going to give that surviving spouse or that surviving child an opportunity to disclaim those assets with no tax impact to them and let those assets flow through to a nonprofit organization. Very powerful tool and very often neglected. Foundations and third parties, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. This is, to some degree, in some towns I've worked with, this is a competitive point. You've got the organizations out there that want to manage money for you, so they're out soliciting donors to give donations to them. Those are the same donors you're trying to solicit. Around here we have a much better relationship with the community foundations. We're all partners in this together. That is not true in a lot of the places I've done this. I mean, they can be very adversarial. We don't really have that issue here as much. A quick comment here on sticky assets that we were talking about earlier. In the end, what we're talking about is we're talking about controlling assets. So that's what this business is about, whether we like it or not. And what is happening is competitors in this industry. Who are your competitors? I'm your competitor, whether you like it or not. I'm a competitor. Because what happens is we're seeing a large part of this industry increasingly try to develop ways to control assets right through an individual's death. So Charles Schwab, Merrill Lynch, donor-advised funds. Hey, why would I send my client to give money to you? Those dollars come out of my office. I don't get paid for them anymore. Why don't I just do a donor-advised fund and keep managing those assets for generations and getting paid on them? That's why this is becoming more and more. If you guys have seen, Charles Schwab is now doing a national campaign on donor-advised funds. So they are in the wings. They understand there's money to be made here, and that's something that they are pursuing. I don't have any Charles Schwab guys in here, do I? I was going to be careful. So most charities are at a disadvantage, right? I mean, you can't offer investment or accounting services. That's not what you do. But investment and accounting services certainly can offer charitable planning services. So you're already kind of at a disadvantage from that standpoint when you're talking about commercial retail individuals. That trend is going to increase. We see that the money is no longer in the construction of estate tools. It's no longer in a trust, in establishing a trust. It's now in trust administration. So CPA firms, brokerage firms, They're going to continue to develop donor-advised funds, trust administration, post-mortem opportunities that they can retain control on those assets. You're going to see more and more of that going forward. Let's talk about, actually it's 3 tips. I've scrapped 2 of them. So 3 tips for increasing your organization's plan giving success and plan giving prospecting success. Number 1, plan giving is not programmatic. It's cultural. And what I mean by that is, too often, what we do is someone will call me up on the phone and they'll say, hey, I want you to come in and do a presentation to our donors about plan giving. So they'll pay me money and I'll come and sit down and I'll explain to their donors all the wonderful opportunities they have if they do plan giving. And then a year later I'll run into someone from that organization and they'll say, well, you know what, we really didn't generate any plan gifts out of that at all. So, and that's because they're looking at it from a program standpoint. That's not what plan giving is. It's a cultural component. You have to educate your donors right from the start. You have to integrate that education and understanding into everything you do, whether it's your pledges, whether it's your events, doesn't matter what it is. And you have to recognize and promote successes in the plan giving so that people understand, hey, there's an opportunity out there that maybe they're not taking advantage of. That then becomes your plan giving culture. And that culture will basically migrate through everything you do with all your donors, and it'll develop those opportunities going forward. Plan gifts are a product of a relationship. For the most part, when a donor walks in your door and they hand you a $100 check, they're not thinking about a plan gift. They're not thinking about leaving you $1 million upon their death. This is about relationship. It's about building that donor from identification. From the time they come to one of your events and they give you that $100 check, are you actually making them aware that plan giving is something that could benefit them and benefit you as an organization? From the time you realize that donor, where they actually do give you a pledge or a reoccurring gift, they're now a donor on your books, you know who they are, you've identified them, all the way through the transition, and I think this is the most important part that we often overlook. We don't want donors. Nobody in here wants a donor. We want shareholders. We want partners. That's what plan giving is about. Plan giving is about transitioning from just handing you a check to making you part of their legacy. And that's a big step for an individual. They have to be committed to what you're doing, and they also want to be kept informed on an ongoing basis about what you're doing. So, number 3, never overestimate the perceived strength of your relationships. Again, wounded warrior. What can you control? Your donor interaction, your organizational culture. What you can't control, tax law changes, marketing conditions, public perception. Quarterback rule. If you're not it, you better find out who it is. It might not be your donor. It might be a child. It might be a CPA. It might be a financial advisor. It might be a spouse. Where I want to be, I want to be right there. I want to be the person controlling the flow of information. So if I'm talking to a donor, how does that go? Mr. Donor, you've been really gracious. You've given us some wonderful gifts over time. I think plan giving would be a great opportunity for you to explore. Would it be okay if I called your tax preparer and your financial advisor to see if that's something that's applicable to you? Now I'm in control. I'm the quarterback. So this is more for your individual purposes. Start with yourself. You have IRA accounts, you have 401k accounts. Your financial advisors are going to understand beneficiary, or hopefully they're going to understand beneficiary designations, some of these plan giving tools. Start with yourself. Focus on opportunities, not solutions. So how many of you have heard a donor say, well, all my money's tied up in my IRA account? Or, I'm not so sure I'm going to have enough money to make it through the rest of my life. Or I want to make sure my spouse is taken care of when I'm gone. And those are plan giving opportunities. That's exactly what those are. So that opens up that door for that conversation. Don't assume. The richest individual in Henderson, actually in Western North Carolina for a long time, was a little gentleman that none of you know. His name was Johann Wehrheim. Mr. Wehrheim defected during World War II, and he and his father, over the course of time, ended up owning one full block in Manhattan. He was worth $132 million. He lived in a one-story ranch, wore overalls every day. If you knew him, you would think, who's that bum that hasn't taken a bath? Lived in Hendersonville for 27 years before he passed away. Remember, plans change. Every individual is going to have something during their life: divorces, death, inheritances. All of those are opportunities to address plan giving opportunities with an individual donor. So it changes over time. So you have to keep that culture as part of your organization as it moves forward. And then number 5, just ask. I mean, that's the bottom line. How do you increase the donations to your organization by 50%? Ask for 50% more money. It's that simple. One thing we've been talking about here, and Kim had asked me to touch a little bit on the ethical component of plan giving, because this is different, right? I mean, this is different than someone just handing you a check. We're talking about a relationship with an individual. Relationship means that there's responsibility. What is that responsibility? Is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it moral?
Is it all of the above?
Is there a difference? There is. What is legal and what is ethical can be 2 entirely different things.
True.
So, what it comes down to is it comes down to a question of fiduciary duty. Fiduciary is a person or organization that owes another the duties of good faith or trust. Now, typically when we talk about fiduciary duty, we're talking about a legal obligation. Not always the case in my mind. Are you a fiduciary? I don't know. Are you? Can you influence a donor's decisions? I'm sure most of you can. Are you compensated to influence decisions? So, there's an interest issue there, right? Whose interest are you working in? Can decisions that you influence change a donor's life? Maybe not with a $100 check, but with a $1 million plan gift, it sure can. Regulations are changing dramatically around this. 2010, we had the Uniform Prudential Management Institutional Funds Act, UPMIFA. Basically applied fiduciary standards to directors, board members that had any active role in the management of funds, including nonprofit organizations. Attorney generals enforcing deceptive fundraising practices. We've seen a 300% increase. New York, Virginia, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Florida, states that have seen the largest increase in prosecutions for fundraising fraud over the last 2 years. Expansion of the Investment Advisors Act and the DOL application of the Fiduciary Standards Act. This is brand new. This is happening right now. Some of you have probably seen, believe it or not, in my world, if you weren't licensed, if I wasn't licensed as a Series 65 advisor, I had no fiduciary obligation to my clients. That seems crazy, but that's the truth. So somebody said, how can that be? So they changed that. They've applied the Fiduciary Standards Act, which will make all people in the practice of advising, giving financial advice, fiduciaries. Plan giving. Are you giving financial advice? It's certainly not a reach to believe that this type of standard could be applied to what you do in the near future. Creation of self-regulatory and professional organizations, CFP, FMA, Financial Managers Association, AFP. They've all established ethical codes that may not be going far enough. Oh, yeah, I forgot about this. The number one claim for attorney generals, misrepresentation about gift annuity returns and liquidity. If a donor comes in and gives you $100,000 and you tell them that $100,000 will generate $6,000 a year for them, is that a 6% rate of return? Anybody? It is not a 6% rate of return. Annuity contract includes return of principal over a life expectancy. If you tell a donor they're getting a 6% rate of return on a gift annuity under those parameters, you are lying to that individual. The actual rate of return on that contract is 1.7%. So they're coming in and saying, well, my broker can only do 2% and you're giving me 6%. You are misleading that advisor or that individual on what the real return of that is. That is the number one complaint that comes out of the Attorney General's office.
It can also go the other way if they use cash and they get a greater tax-free return of principal. The rate is actually higher than you may be stating.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And again, you have to, it comes down to making sure the individual understands. All the time, I'll have clients come into my office and say, oh, I bought this wonderful annuity. It's paying 8.5% return. But they don't have access to that principal and its return of principal. That is not their rate of return. It is very misleading, and that's led to more prosecutions than any other complaint with the Attorney General's office. As I was saying, these ethical standards, are they going far enough? Here's a pretty typical one. I will not engage in activities that conflict with their fiduciary, ethical, legal obligations of the organization, clients, or profession. What's wrong with this? Who has the priority? Organizations, clients, or my peers? Who's my fiduciary responsibility to? You know, this is pretty typical. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. Primarily, I'm not saying anything wrong with this, because this is Article 2 of the AFP Code of Ethics. So, but it certainly raises the question, and that's what litigation is all about right now, is trying to define who you're responsible to, who your real fiduciary duty belongs to. Who can't be taught? 77-year-old client expresses an interest in secured income. Advisor recommends a large gift annuity. Legal? Sure, legal. Ethical? Probably, right? Gift annuity. Individual comes in, wants a gift annuity. By the way, these are real in North Carolina. 2008. Everybody remembers what's happened in 2008. Client becomes ill and needs significant funds to cover her care. Because of the illiquid nature of her gift annuity, she is forced to sell her house at about 40 cents on the dollar. It bankrupts her family because of a $250,000 gift annuity. Donor wants to give you a gift but wants to make check from the spouse's trust. Boy, I get this one all the time. Somebody comes in and wants to make an investment. Oh, I'm a joint trustee on my spouse's trust. I'm just going to make a check. I'm going to make a check on their account. Legal? Probably. Most trusts have multiple trustees. That you don't know for sure. Ethical? Gets a little bit grayer at that point. Donor had not yet made public that he was in a very difficult divorce and had no right to make a check for the spouse's account, on the wife's account. Donor gives nonprofit executive a piece of folk art in gratitude for all the good advice. Legal? Absolutely legal. Ethical? Maybe, maybe not. The art was of minimal value. It probably wasn't worth $50. But it had been promised to the son. The son was a prominent businessman in this small town. The son raised questions about the ethical standards of the charity. It had a devastating effect on this small charity. Over a $35 piece of folk art. A sculpture of a cat. So when we go into these type of environments, is there a way that we can look at that and say, wow, okay, we're all going to deal with ethical issues in our careers. I mean, that's part of what we do. So is there a way that we can check our response to those without getting, ethics classes are long, they're boring, they tell you all this great stuff. It boils down to a couple things. If you justify, well, everybody else is doing it, so I can too. If you rationalize, well, it's okay because it really doesn't. It's just a $35 piece of folk art. It really isn't going to hurt anybody. And if you minimize, I will just do it once and not going to make a habit of it. If you ask yourself those questions, because you're probably not going to ask me or you're not going to ask one of your peers, but in the back of your mind, you're going to ask yourself these questions. If you answered yes that you're doing any one of those, you really need to ask yourself whether or not you're doing the right thing. And that'll keep you out of an awful lot of ethics. Thank you. Questions?
Ryan, you mentioned briefly about, not briefly, but about the fiduciary. I've heard a lot in the food fighting about fiduciary rules. What are we talking about there? Is this like a national-wide change?
It is. So in 2014, as part of the Budget Act, the Department of Labor was put in charge of retirement accounts in this country. That's a little bit scary. Yeah. So the Department of Labor now basically has oversight where the SEC and the Securities Exchange Commission did before. So the Labor Department said there's two things that we have to address. We have to address, number one, the legal rights that an individual investor has, and clarity in cost, transparency. Mm-hmm. So they created the Fiduciary Standards Act. And that act simply says that if you manage money, if you give advice related to the management of money, you are a fiduciary. Whether you're licensed to be a fiduciary or not, you are one. So it is a national thing. President Trump put a stay on this a couple weeks ago, so they're still kind of working it through, but it will come into effect, and it will be something that's probably applicable to your industry before long. Yeah. Other questions? Ira?
When you were talking about gift annuities, it was clear to me, but I don't know if it was clear to everyone in the room. A charity is not licensed to issue a commercial annuity. So
Correct.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a contract for a gift.
Right.
In North Carolina, is it still correct that you cannot accept a gift annuity as a charity or manage unless you have $100,000 in unrestricted assets?
I think that is still true. There is still a limitation. There's also some additional related to that UPMIFA, that 2010 rule. There's some additional guidelines that do that. So yes, so some charities cannot manage their own annuity contracts because of funding limitations. Thank you. Yeah. Questions? I had one back here.
Yes, several times during your presentation you mentioned that prospecting process for finding donors who have charitable remainder trust and other things. What is that prospecting? I mean, do you go through the database, do you talk to them, or is there another source?
Well, your best source of prospects for planning gifts are your existing donors.
Right.
And it's about strengthening that relationship. You know, next you have the individuals that are providing those type of services, whether it's the attorneys or the accountants. And then, that brings a really good point. One of the mistakes I think we make, and I touched on it and didn't go into it. So all of a sudden you want to go out and generate plan giving prospects. So you hold a plan giving seminar. That's not going to do you any good. Hold a understanding your IRA beneficiary seminar. You know, focus on something simple. Understand how